Look there. Pat, the compass is in a spin.
Geiger's up to the top.
Yeah, that's it, all right.
What if I told you one of the most terrifying alien movies of all time almost looked completely different? Long before John Carpenter's slimy body horror classic, there was the 1951 original The Thing from Another World, a movie born in the chilling shadow of the Cold War, stitched together by feuding filmmakers and starring a monster that was never supposed to look the way you remember it. Behind the frozen Arctic landscapes and the iconic burning title letters, there were hidden production battles, incredibly dangerous stunts, and secrets so wild they could have killed the cast. Some call it just another 1950s monster flick, but the truth is, it was a Cold War nightmare, a story of paranoia and survival disguised as science fiction. And the stories from behind the camera are just as chilling as the creature that burst out of the ice. These are 20 hidden and bizarre facts about the making of The Thing from Another World. The director, who maybe didn't direct at all on paper and in the official credits, The Thing from Another World was directed by Nyby. He was a respected film editor who was supposedly getting his big break into the world of directing with this film. His name is right there, etched into Hollywood history. But if you talk to the actors who were on set, they'll tell you a very different and much more controversial story. Many swore then, and still swear today, that the real puppet master, the true uncredited director of the film, was the legendary filmmaker Howard Hawks. Hawks was officially only the producer, but according to the cast, he was a constant, domineering presence on set. He was seen blocking shots, rewriting dialogue on the fly, and coaching the actors on their performances, often giving line readings himself. To many, it looked less like a producer giving helpful guidance, and more like Hawks was directing the entire film himself, using Nyby as a simple front. Why would he do this? Some film historians believe Hawks, a prestigious director known for classic westerns and comedies, didn't want his A-list name officially tied to what he considered a B-list monster movie. Others say he was simply testing his protege Nyby, giving him the credit to help his career. Either way, the question of who really directed this classic film remains one of Hollywood's most debated and fascinating mysteries. The terrifying shapeshifter that never was. The film is based on the legendary 1938 sci-fi novella Who Goes There by John W. Campbell, and that story gave birth to one of the most terrifying ideas in all of fiction. A creature that could perfectly, cellularly, shapeshift into anyone or anything it touched. Imagine the intense, claustrophobic paranoia. Your best friend, your commanding officer, the person sleeping in the bunk next to you, might not be human anymore. That psychological horror was supposed to be the heart of the movie. But when production began, the studios slammed into a cold, hard, and immovable wall called the budget. Pulling off convincing shape-changing effects in 1951 would have required incredibly expensive and time-consuming makeup, complex and innovative camera tricks, and multiple elaborate creature suits. It was simply too ambitious and too expensive for a B-movie. Instead, the filmmakers were forced to scrap the entire, brilliant shape-shifting concept, radically simplifying the alien into a single, hulking, Frankenstein-like figure. It was far easier and cheaper to shoot, but it was a huge and disappointing departure from the source material's core concept. It would take John Carpenter, 31 years later, to finally bring the true, terrifying shapeshifter to life on screen. The A-list star buried and suffocating in the monster suit, before he became the legendary, universally beloved Marshal Matt Dillon on the iconic TV series Gunsmoke. The towering actor James Arness had one of the strangest, most brutal, and most physically punishing early roles in Hollywood, playing the alien creature in The Thing from Another World. At over 6 feet, 7 inches tall, he had the immense, intimidating size the producers wanted, towering menacingly over the rest of the cast. But the role was a physical nightmare. The full-body makeup and heavy prosthetics took hours to apply each day. with layers of latex, padding, and a bulky headpiece that severely restricted his breathing and vision. Arness famously hated the suit, complaining constantly to the crew that he felt like he was suffocating inside it. To make matters worse, some scenes required him to perform dangerous stunts, like crashing through doors and taking the full force of the real fire blasts, all while barely being able to see through the tiny eye slits in the mask. Years later, Arness admitted in interviews that he was deeply embarrassed by the role. He even skipped the film's premiere, worried that his friends and the public would laugh at him for playing a lumbering, blood-drinking vegetable monster. Little did he know that, buried under all that uncomfortable makeup and latex, he was creating one of the most iconic monsters in sci-fi history. The monster's face got a last-minute, Frankenstein-inspired makeover. The alien suit was originally designed by the talented makeup artist Lee Greenway, who spent months creating something truly unique and otherworldly. Early sketches and concepts for the creature leaned toward a more alien, non-human look, sleek, almost insect-like, with a strange, biomechanical appearance that would have been closer to the novella's vision of a truly alien being. But when the producers and studio executives saw the initial results, they reportedly panicked. They thought audiences in 1951 wouldn't accept something so strange and abstract. So, at the very last minute, they demanded major, and in the crew's opinion, disappointing changes. Greenway was ordered to scrap his original design and simplify the creature, giving it a much more recognizably human-like head, with a heavy brow and squared-off, almost Frankenstein features. This last-minute compromise frustrated the creative team, who felt their more imaginative design had been watered down, but the studio's decision stuck. The alien ended up looking more like a classic Universal movie monster than an unearthly terror from another galaxy, a decision made out of a commercial fear that the audience wasn't ready for something truly and disturbingly alien. The insanely dangerous, kerosene-fueled fire stunt. One of the most shocking and memorable moments in the entire movie comes when the alien monster bursts into the crew's living quarters and is immediately and completely set on fire. For a film made in 1951, this wasn't just a daring stunt. It was one of the most dangerous and ambitious full-body fire stunts ever attempted in Hollywood. The entire scene was shot MOS, meaning MIT out sound, without sound recording, so the crew could focus entirely on the complex and incredibly dangerous choreography of the stunt. Multiple stuntmen holding large fire extinguishers were hidden just off camera, ready to spring into action. The stuntman playing the alien was covered in protective gear and then doused in real ignited kerosene. The flames burned so hot and so intensely that actors who were standing far off camera reported feeling the intense heat blister their skin. The sequence was terrifyingly real, a moment of genuine, uncontrolled danger that almost ended in disaster, but resulted in one of the most unforgettable and visceral scenes in the history of 1950s science fiction. The entire set for the sake of realism. To sell the film's oppressive and claustrophobic Arctic atmosphere, the production crew didn't just rely on fake snow and actors pretending to be cold. They went a remarkable step further, actually refrigerating the massive sound stages at the RKO Ranch. They dropped the ambient temperature on the set to near freezing levels for a very specific and practical reason, so that the actor's breath would visibly fog up on camera, just as it would in a real polar environment. The cast had to bundle up in real heavy Arctic parkas, not just for the scenes, but also between takes to stay warm. The environment was so cold that even the camera lenses would sometimes frost over. It was a miserable and uncomfortable way to film, but it gave the movie a powerful and undeniable sense of authenticity that special effects and acting alone could never have captured. The chill you see on screen wasn't fake. The Arctic was brought to life on a Hollywood soundstage. The uncredited stars and the military file, opening most films of the era, opened by proudly and immediately announcing the names of their cast and crew in a long, formal credit sequence. But The Thing from Another World did something incredibly bold and unusual for its time. The opening title of the film simply burned its way through the screen with those iconic, fiery letters, and then the movie launched straight into the tense, unfolding story. There were no opening names, no billing, no starring the credits whatsoever. The actors, including the film's leads, went completely uncredited until the very end of the film. This was a deliberate and brilliant stylistic choice to add to the atmosphere of mystery and unease. It made the film feel less like a glamorous Hollywood production and more like a classified military file or a stark, urgent news report that was unfolding in real time. The choice made the story itself, and the terrifying creature at its heart, the undisputed star of the show. The clever editing trick that added a missing victim. Not everything terrifying that you see on screen was in the original script. During the difficult editing process, the filmmakers felt that the alien's threat needed to be more pronounced in the first half of the film. The audience needed to see, not just be told, just how dangerous the creature was. So, the editor, Nyby, cleverly and resourcefully spliced in an extra, completely unscripted moment of horror. He took scraps of unused footage, a quick shot of a minor character, a reaction shot from another actor, and created a very short sequence that shows a crew member's sudden and unexplained disappearance, strongly hinting that the alien had gotten to him. It was a subtle but brilliant trick, built almost entirely from footage that was originally meant to be thrown away. But it completely changed the tone of the film's first half, establishing the alien as an unstoppable and deadly force, even when it wasn't physically on the screen. A loose and almost unrecognizable adaptation of the original novella. The movie is technically based on the legendary 1938 sci-fi novella Who Goes There by the influential author John W. Campbell. But if you've ever read that classic story, you know that the 1951 film barely resembles it at all. Campbell's original book was a masterpiece of intense paranoia and psychological horror, centered on a terrifying and brilliant alien creature that could perfectly, on a cellular level, imitate any living thing it touched. This forced the isolated crew to turn on each other in a desperate, paranoid attempt to figure out who among them was still human. The 1951 film, due to budget and technical limitations, stripped most of that brilliant psychological horror away, focusing instead on a more straightforward, single monster threat and adding the then topical science versus the military theme. It was John Carpenter's now legendary 1982 remake, The Thing, that would finally and faithfully adapt the horrifying shape-shifting paranoia of Campbell's original book. A bizarre monster made entirely of plants. Most 1950s movie aliens were the stereotypical little green men or bug-eyed invaders from Mars. But the creative team behind The Thing from Another World, in a stroke of brilliant originality, went in a different and far stranger direction. The alien in this film wasn't an animal at all. It was conceived as an advanced, intelligent, and highly dangerous plant-based life form. According to the script and the scientists' frantic dialogue, it was essentially a super carrot, a walking, sentient, blood-drinking vegetable that fed on blood plasma like a vampire but grew and reproduced through seeds, with complex cells that mimicked chlorophyll. This was a radically bizarre and original choice for the time, a creature that blurred the line between a science experiment gone wrong and a creature from a nightmare. It also gave the film a strange and powerful allegorical edge, science run amok, and nature itself turning hostile and predatory. The deleted sabotage scene and an intelligent monster. In the early drafts of the script, the alien creature was portrayed as being much more intelligent and strategic. There was a whole sequence included where the Thing is shown to be deliberately and systematically sabotaging the Arctic outpost's essential equipment, including the heating system and the oil lines. The idea was to show the creature not just as a mindless brute, but as a cunning and intelligent invader, slowly and methodically turning the base into a frozen death trap for the humans. However, When the initial footage was cut together, the producers felt that these scenes slowed down the film's pacing too much. The entire sabotage sequence was scrapped, leaving only vague hints in the final film that the alien might be responsible for the failing systems. In the final movie, the sabotage is more implied than explicitly seen, a change that, ironically, forces the audience to fill in the blanks and perhaps makes the monster feel even smarter and more mysterious. Science versus the military, the film's true ideological conflict. At its core, the movie isn't just about a group of people fighting a monster from outer space. It's a powerful and pointed allegory for the defining ideological clash of the early Cold War era, the intense conflict between scientific curiosity and military pragmatism. This struggle is perfectly embodied by the film's two central opposing figures. Dr. Carrington, the head scientist, is arrogant, obsessive, and driven by the pursuit of knowledge above all else. He believes the alien, no matter how dangerous, should be studied and even protected, arguing that the knowledge it holds is worth any human sacrifice. On the other side, the Air Force captain, Pat Hendry, is a practical man of action who sees the thing only as a clear and present danger that must be destroyed at all costs to protect his people. This tense and dramatic tug-of-war between intellectual curiosity and military necessity was not just science fiction. It was a thinly veiled warning to 1950s audiences about the real-world fears of the atomic age, the dangers of unchecked science versus the brutal necessity of national defense. Cracking the Arctic ice with real, window-shattering explosives. When the crew in the film finally uncovers the massive flying saucer that is buried deep in the Arctic ice, the filmmakers wanted the reveal to feel massive, violent, and completely real. To get the shot, they didn't rely on simple camera tricks or miniatures. They used actual powerful explosive charges buried deep under the set, which they detonated to blast huge chunks of fake ice and snow sky high. The force of the real explosions was so strong that it reportedly rattled the studio walls and, according to several crew members, even cracked several real windows in the nearby studio buildings. For a movie that was made on a relatively modest budget, it was an incredibly risky and dangerous stunt that pushed the limits of on-set safety to the absolute edge. But it paid off, creating one of the most iconic and memorable images in all of 1950s science fiction. The Arctic wasn't fake that day. They blew it up for real. A blizzard of cornflakes and other low-tech movie magic. The special effects in the early 1950s didn't have the luxury of computers, green screens, or any digital assistance to pull off the spectacular look of the ice and debris exploding into the air. When the alien craft is uncovered, the crew turned to some low-tech and surprisingly mundane genius. They loaded powerful air jets with pounds and pounds of common cornflakes and all-purpose flour. When blasted into the air at high speed, under the harsh and unforgiving studio lights and filmed in stark black and white, the breakfast cereal and baking ingredients perfectly mimicked the look of sharp ice shards and billowing snow exploding across the screen. The simple trick worked so well that most audiences never suspected that it was actually breakfast cereal raining down on the terrified actors. This, combined with careful and detailed matte painting work to create the illusion of a massive frozen wasteland, gave the sequence an epic scale. It's a perfect example of old-school Hollywood ingenuity, where sometimes history is just smoke, mirrors, and cereal. Hiding the monster in the shadows to create maximum fear. The final alien suit, though imposing in its size, wasn't exactly terrifying when seen up close in full light. It was, after all, a man in a rubber suit. The filmmakers, especially the uncredited director Howard Hawks, knew this. So they made a brilliant and classic horror movie choice. Keep the creature hidden in the shadows as much as possible. Most of the monster's appearances in the film are quick, terrifying flashes, dark silhouettes seen through doorways, or chaotic scenes where it bursts in and out of the frame before you can get a good look at it. By deliberately showing less, They masterfully created more suspense and terror. Viewers were left to imagine the gruesome details. And as any horror fan knows, what you don't see is often far scarier than what you do. The deep, dark shadows of the Arctic outpost did the terrifying work that the makeup and rubber suit couldn't fully achieve. In the end, the monster's mystery became its biggest and most effective weapon. The birth of a sci-fi legacy that changed a genre. When it hit theaters in 1951, The Thing from Another World didn't just scare audiences, it effectively lit the fuse for a whole decade of creature features and sci-fi horror films. The film's iconic burning title sequence, the claustrophobic and isolated Arctic setting, and the central idea of a scientific team accidentally unleashing an ancient alien menace. All of these became powerful and enduring blueprints for countless sci-fi and horror films that followed. Its influence stretched far beyond the 1950s. Gene Roddenberry's original Star Trek, with its message of a united and professional human crew exploring the unknown, was deeply influenced by the film's serious and adult tone. John Carpenter openly paid tribute to it with his legendary 1982 remake, and countless modern directors have borrowed its atmosphere of paranoia and its central theme of man versus the great, terrifying unknown. What started as a modest, black-and-white thriller ended up shaping an entire genre for generations to come. The monster may have been defeated in the end, but its long, dark shadow still looms over the landscape of science fiction today. The film's unique visual style, a sci-fi film noir. Here's a secret that film buffs and historians love to debate. The Thing from Another World isn't just a science fiction movie. It's also, in many ways, a classic film noir. Look at the visual style that was used. The deep, long shadows, the high contrast black and white cinematography that emphasizes darkness, the claustrophobic interior spaces, and the rapid-fire, overlapping dialogue between a group of cynical, tough-talking characters. The film is less of a monster movie and more of a gritty, suspenseful thriller that happens to have an alien in it. This was almost certainly a deliberate choice from the uncredited director, Howard Hawks, who had mastered this kind of fast-paced, dialogue-driven style in his other films. By shooting the film with the visual and verbal language of a gritty crime thriller, he made the extraordinary story feel grounded, serious, and adult. It added a layer of realism and a sophistication that was completely absent from other sci-fi films of the era, which were often brightly lit and looked like children's fantasies. The unseen and unspoken female scientist. While the film features a prominent female character in a Nikki Nicholson, the original novella, Who Goes There?, did not have any women in it at all. The all-male environment of the original story was a key part of its intense, claustrophobic paranoia. However, in the 1950s, it was almost unheard of for a major studio film not to have a female lead and a romantic subplot. So, the character of Nikki was created for the film. But here's an interesting and progressive detail that often goes unnoticed. The scientific team at the Arctic outpost is not entirely male. In several scenes, you can briefly see another woman working in the background of the laboratory. She is a scientist, a colleague of Dr. Carrington, but she is never given a name or any lines. Her quiet, professional presence is a small but significant detail. In an era where female scientists in film were almost non-existent, her inclusion, however minor, was a subtle and forward-thinking choice. The unmade, even stranger sequel. The film was a massive hit for RKO Pictures, and the studio was eager to capitalize on its success with a sequel. A treatment for a follow-up film was actually written. The proposed story would have picked up where the first film left off, with the surviving crew returning to civilization to warn the world. However, their story would be met with disbelief and ridicule from the government and the public. The sequel would have seen the crew struggling to prove that the threat was real, all while a hidden, dormant piece of the alien creature, which had been accidentally brought back with them, begins to grow and regenerate in a new location. The proposed sequel would have moved the action from the isolated Arctic to a bustling, populated city, exploring themes of public disbelief and government cover-ups. Unfortunately, RKO Pictures was in a state of financial collapse at the time, and the studio went under before the ambitious sequel could ever be made, leaving it as one of the great what-if stories of 1950s science fiction. The ultimate what-if. An A-list star was almost the monster. This final fact is a piece of classic Hollywood legend that has been debated for years. But it's too good not to share as a final what-if. As we know, the relatively unknown at the time, James Arness was cast as the creature. However, according to some persistent early production rumors and unconfirmed stories from the time, the original choice for the monster was none other than one of the biggest and most iconic actors in all of Hollywood history, John Wayne. The story goes that the producer and uncredited director, Howard Hawks, who had worked with Wayne on numerous classic westerns like Red River, initially offered him the role. The thinking was that it would be a shocking and unforgettable piece of casting to have America's biggest, most heroic star play the monstrous, silent alien. Wayne, unsurprisingly, is said to have turned down the role immediately, reportedly telling Hawks, in no uncertain terms, "I'm not getting in a damn rubber suit." While it's likely just a piece of fun Hollywood folklore, just imagine for a second the iconic, lumbering silhouette of the thing from another world, but with the unmistakable, confident swagger of John Wayne underneath. It's a bizarre and hilarious alternate reality that adds one final, strange layer to the enduring legend of this sci-fi masterpiece. The thing from another world may look like a simple 1950s monster flick on the surface, but behind the scenes, it was anything but simple. A hidden director, dangerous on-set stunts, bizarre creative choices, and a lasting legacy that outgrew its own monster suit. This film managed to freeze its place in cinematic history. What makes it unforgettable isn't just the thrill of an alien crashing through doors, but the powerful and brilliant way it captured the pervasive Cold War fear that the enemy could come from anywhere, at any time, even from the frozen wastes at the top of the world. That deep paranoia, that palpable sense of dread, still echoes in modern horror and science fiction today. Over 70 years later, the chilling final warning at the end of the film feels just as relevant and just as terrifying. Watch the skies.